Voyage.
I'm Darren Marlar, your host for all things felonious. Welcome to Allegedly. Love. You can't put a price tag on it, can you? In this story, you'll meet Geoffrey Beckett, an Australian man who thought he had found love in the Philippines. He thought he'd rescued a woman from forced prostitution. He thought he had a chance for his happily ever after. Perhaps I don't need to tell you, he thought wrong. And learning that lesson would nearly cost him everything he held dear, including his life. Featuring Australian actor Charlie Clausen, this is Love Gone Wrong in the Philippines.
I like this place. You meet people, friendly sorts. I was going to order a beer. You want one? A round for all of us. You ever sit next to someone at the bar and they tell you a tale and you think, this bloke's either off his face or full of shit? Well, I got a John Dory for you. It's a story of a crime that happened to me, and it's 100% true. Except for the names, I'm not going to use real names except for my own, all right? Cheers. I'm Jeff, and I'm an Indigenous Australian. Up to the age of 38, I was a house builder. But with a bad back, I gave this career up and started a website to help promote various businesses. A direct mail business. What kind isn't important. I had a bad second marriage. It ended up after I learned she had a split personality. A kind of Jekyll and Hyde situation. At times, she was the most wonderful girl in the world. Other times, she was attacking me with a knife. I had to leave. I took a trip to Manila for a little reset. I went to see my old friend Vic. He was a Philippine movie star. He always played the bad guy, but he was anything but. I met him in Australia years before. I was also planning to do a bit of sightseeing. So after my visit with Vic, I headed to Cebu, commonly known as the Queen City of the South. It's the second largest city in the Philippines, but not at all chaotic like Manila. I took the ferry.
I stood on the deck, watching Manila slide past. The cool ocean breeze and bottle of complimentary champagne improved my mood. The ink on my divorce was still wet. Divorce number 2, if you want to be technical about it. Say what you want about the first. No one would argue with the second. There's just so many times a bloke can be attacked by his wife with a kitchen knife. Most of the time, she was sweet and as lovely as can be. But every now and then, I'd find her speaking in tongues like she was possessed. I started hiding the knives, but that didn't solve anything. So here I was, on a ferry 1,000 miles from home. I felt like I was putting my troubles past me. Little did I know, they were just beginning. I was the only foreigner aboard the ship, which didn't matter. Everyone was so friendly. And just as I loved the Philippine people, I could say as much about the cuisine. After inhaling my adobo chicken, I noticed 2 women looking my way. Sisters, as it turned out, both beauties, but the younger one especially. She was 20, with the soul of someone twice her age. But I just saw a smile with enough wattage to power this ship. So I summoned up the courage to go over and introduce myself. I'm Jeff.
Hi, I'm Candy.
I see. May I join you? As I sat down, her sister excused herself back to the cabin. Are you headed to Cebu?
Bohol, actually, to visit my mother. I'm working in Japan, but I wanted to spend the holidays at home.
She seemed so wholesome. We chatted and gulped down cold beers. I was starting to feel a little drunk. Candy was electric. I couldn't wait to hold her. Little did I know this would prove to be a decision that would bite me hard. We staggered back to my cabin, and she stayed with me till morning.
I was naive when it come to women. I was basically a country boy who spent most of his life on a construction site, and I needed to learn the rules of love and courtship. There was a void of experience, and Candy filled it. She and I spent time together in the Philippines until she had to return to her job in Japan. When we parted, I was left with an empty feeling. She kept in touch with me after that, and painted a picture of a living hell in Japan where she was dancing at a club. She said they forced her to take Shibu, as a methamphetamine. The sweet words over the phone made me feel Cupid's arrow penetrate my heart. Or maybe he was aiming a little lower. Before long I was on a plane to Tokyo, then on the bullet train to Fukuoka, then Saga, where she worked as a Jappayoki. Later on I would learn that meant something fairly close to a prostitute. She worked inside the club owned by the Yakuza, the Japanese mafia. They had her passport and were forcing her to work there. I got into a heated argument with the manager, but I managed to get Candy sent home to the Philippines after her replacement arrived.
After my sweet Candy returned from Japan, our days together were great fun. But I soon started noticing it would always happen in the morning. As I said, I had little experience with women to that point, but as these bouts of nausea became more frequent, I took Candy to the doctor near our house. After an exam and some tests, he confirmed my worst fears. Candy was pregnant. Doctor, can she and I have a moment, please?
Jeff, I know what you're thinking. You are the father.
How did you know I'd ask? She looked at me funny. I mean, how do you know I'm the father?
I haven't been with anyone else.
You were a virgin?
Not exactly.
You either were or you weren't.
I had one other man 2 years ago.
You've only been with me and one other bloke. She glanced at the floor.
When I turned 16, my mother told me, it's time to start working. I thought she meant getting a stall in the market selling jackfruit, but she handed me her stiletto heels. It didn't take long for me to meet a client. He took me into the cabin of a fishing boat. The man smelled of rotting bangus. I closed my eyes until it was over, and I had a few greasy bills in my hands. He was my first and last. I told my mother she could throw me out in the street. I would never do that again.
I'm so sorry you had to go through that, Candy.
I understand if you don't want to be with me now.
Her eyes locked onto mine. They were all watery. I bought her story. Lock, stock and barrel. Idiot.
Now some might wonder why, beyond my naivety, I didn't press it further. On some level I did want to be a father, the father of this child. Something like an abortion was never brought up by either of us, which is probably why I didn't push for a DNA test either. What started out as a disaster, this unplanned pregnancy, it turned into something I was really looking forward to. We were married in a shotgun wedding by a judge 2 weeks before my son was born. For the sake of this story, I'm going to call him Alan. The wedding itself was a joke. The judge turned up drunk, 3 hours late. I wanted to give this marriage my best shot and give this girl everything. I bought a penthouse for us in Cebu. Life became better. We moved to Cebu and I hired a yaya, a housekeeper, like a nanny, to help out. That gave Cand and me time to have dinners, movies and dates outside the house. Everything was humming along great for a minute or two. Then one day my chest got tight and all of a sudden my throat was dry and burning and I couldn't hardly breathe. I thought I was having a heart attack. For a 40-year-old man, I was quite fit. A heart attack, it just didn't make sense. It was bad. I thought I was going to die. I was rushed to the hospital and diagnosed as having a panic attack. That also made no sense. Was I losing my mind? The same thing happened on 2 other occasions. I would learn the truth years later that Candy was poisoning me. The yaya told me. I figured it was all those years of drinking that had caught up with me. Being poisoned by my own wife was the furthest thing from my mind. I gave up drinking mainly because of the panic attacks, and the trips to the hospital stopped as mysteriously as they came. My son soon turned 1 in a flash, and we went to Bohol Island for the baptism. It turned into a major event with a party. At least 100 relatives and friends of Candy were invited. This was very expensive for me, but I wanted to please the girl. This girl had me in total control, and I found myself doing whatever it took to make her happy. After the baptism bash, I set her up in 3 bridal boutiques in Cebu, which kept her happy for a few minutes. Then she wanted to go to Manila and do a fashion design course. I reluctantly agreed and bought a little condo and decorated it for her to stay, and I hired a maid to take care of her there. Candy would come home to Cebu every second weekend. Instead of spending time with me and her son, she was out at the disco until 2 a.m. with her phone switched off, totally uncontactable. My marriage was now a joke, and people were telling me my wife was cheating on me. What man would want to believe that about his own wife? I surely didn't.
In the weeks after moving into our new penthouse, we were getting a lot of work done to it. Tradesmen were coming in and out of our home every day. Today, it was the curtain installer. I came home a few hours early, hoping to surprise my sweet Candy. As I entered the penthouse, I heard shuffling upstairs. Then I noticed that our bed looked unmade. I recalled making it in the morning, as I normally did. I headed upstairs to see about all that noise. Candy? As I reached the top floor, there was my beautiful wife in her silk bathrobe. Looking past her, I could see a young man on the balcony. Was he trying to hide from me? Oi, who's that?
Who?
Him there.
Oh, he's nobody.
He's on our balcony. He must be someone.
He's installing the mirrors.
The mirrors were installed last week.
I mean the tiles.
The tiles were laid the week before.
The curtains, then.
Are you sure?
Oh, I haven't been paying attention.
I see that. I glanced over at the bloke on the balcony. He waved meekly at me.
We have so many servicemen these days going and coming.
Yeah, that's what I was afraid of. As long as he's not providing any extra services.
You're funny.
Then Candy did as she always did to get out of any argument with me. Whoa, hang on. We're not alone.
I just pulled the curtains.
What curtains? They weren't installed yet, despite the presence of the so-called curtain installer.
Bottom line, Candy treated me like shit. Maybe I just didn't care. The time she was away in Manila, which was most of the time, I just became close to my son and enjoyed life and playing golf and living in peace. My credit card statements showed she was shopping in men's clothing shops, probably buying clothes for her boyfriends. But at the time, I was living in total denial about what she was doing behind my back until I could no longer deny it.
My old friend Vic had had a stroke, so I went back to Manila to visit him. After that, I went round to the condo I'd bought for Candy to live in while attending school. She had no idea I was in town. She wasn't home. Neither was the yaya I'd hired to help her out. So I had a look around. Inside the open wardrobe, I noticed men's clothes hanging at one end, all neatly pressed. It all hit me then, what those credit card bills were from. While waiting for Candy to arrive, I went down to see the head guard of security. I asked if my wife was seeing other boys. He said, "Sir, you better find another wife." That's all I needed to hear from him. But I wanted a direct answer from my wife. So I waited for her to come home.
Hi.
Hello, honey.
Oh, you scared me. I didn't expect to see you here.
I came to see Vic. He's not doing very well.
I'm sorry to hear that.
So, I noticed a lot of nice new clothes in the wardrobe.
Yes.
Care to explain?
They belong to my brother.
She was such a good liar. But now I started seeing all her lies in her eyes. But he lives in Cebu.
Yes, but he is coming to Manila and sent his clothes ahead.
I've never heard him mention it.
Well, he is.
And he can afford clothes like this. On his salary.
He saves up for them. He likes to look good when he's in town.
Okay. She must have thought me a complete moron. Her brother was anything but a fashion plate. For him, dressing up for dinner meant wearing flip-flops. I knew Candy was lying. By the way, where's the yaya?
I fired her.
What?
I would come home and catch her in bed with all kinds of men. I had no option but to throw her out.
I knew this girl. She came from a good family in the province. A real innocent type. It sounded to me like Candy was projecting.
And she was a drug addict too.
Again, projecting. I see. I remained quiet in the face of her lies. I did not want to reveal that I knew what lay under her mask. I was waiting for the right moment to expose her charade. First, I'd arranged to meet the Yaya in secrecy to reveal this turgid melodrama directed by Candy.
The Yaya told me all about Candy's drug parties where she and her boyfriend would do shabu at the condo. Apparently Candy was living with a boy named Sydney, the one whose clothes I saw in the closet. According to the Yaya, Sydney was not the only bloke Candy was having sex with, but he was the main one. So I tracked down this Sydney fella where he worked. He denied everything, but I didn't believe him. It was obvious to me that he was her boyfriend. I just went back to Cebu. Next time Candy came home, I confronted her about Sydney. She yelled and screamed like, "How dare you accuse me of cheating?" She even hit me in the head with a wall clock.
She was Candy, but she was not sweet. My heart made me blind to her true nature. She's a serpent in the form of a human being. Although she poisons me, I'm still here, living all her lies. I surely needed to wake up and get her out of my life.
At this point, I'd had enough of this woman. Candy packed her bags and left the penthouse. I let her take the two maids with her. She left our son Alan with me. This mind-bending, torturous, heart-wrenching relationship was finally over, although I imagined in her mind that I would beg her to come back. There's no chance this woman would ever be part of my life again. Enough is enough, even for a super tolerant me. I lived alone with my son for several weeks until I hired a lady recommended by my friend to be my new maid, along with a cousin. We all live now in peaceful harmony for about a year. Candy said that she wanted to meet me at a big mall in Cebu to talk. I had no idea what she wanted to talk about. Everything was over between us. Things did not add up. But against my better judgment, I reluctantly agreed. I wanted to tell her that we were finally divorced, as I filed in Australia. Candy was already an Australian permanent resident and my son an Australian citizen. She didn't know this, but I'd been planning to give her a $100,000 settlement, even though she didn't deserve $1.
I met Candy at the designated location. As I stepped through the door, I saw her sitting alone. As I approached, I could see in her eyes. She was off her face in Cebu. Still, I did my best to be civil. Hello. The moment I sat next to her, Candy bolted. I was so confused until 5 police came out of nowhere and descended on me like an escaped prisoner. They grabbed me and handcuffed me. One of them pointed a sawed-off shotgun at my head.
Huli ka! Arestado ka sa habeas corpus.
I was being charged with habeas corpus, which, in this context, meant I had to produce my son's body. My son, who I supposedly kidnapped, when in reality his mother ran out on him to be with her drug addict boyfriend. There were camera crews filming the whole incident, shouting questions at me as Candy cried and gave an award-worthy acting performance. This was obviously a big setup which Candy had paid for, either with my money or her body.
I was thrown into a lockup with about 15 other boys. The cell was so smelly. No beds, just one toilet. Reality hit me hard. Before long, a young inmate attacked me, swinging wild punches that missed by a foot. I was able to overpower him as he was obviously off his face on drugs. Eventually he calmed down and I just sat on the concrete floor. I still had my phone with me and I received text messages that promised I'd be dead by morning. That first night was hardest. It was sweltering and nearly impossible to sleep with that horrid smell. It was a living hell.
I called the Australian Embassy in Manila. Surely that helped me. Hello, my name is Geoff Beckett. I'm living here in the Philippines and I've been thrown in jail. Okay? Uh-huh. I see. Apparently I'm not the only Aussie to get himself thrown in a Philippine jail over a woman. Listen, mate, they're going to let me rot in here if I don't get some help. You got to do something. I'm an Australian citizen. Doesn't that count for anything? Well then, I got the message loud and clear. You're on your own.
I had to use my wits since that's all I had left on my side. The next morning I asked to see the police captain. They took me into his office. Fortunately, I still had my wallet with me. I took out some cash and sent one of the other officers down to buy some rum and snacks. It was about 8 in the morning and we all started drinking. The captain said, "Your wife's an addict. You have to have her killed." Just like that. I didn't want any part of that. It was probably just a setup, in which case I would really have been in this deep. Had I taken him up on the offer, he'd probably try to bribe me for all I was worth. It didn't matter anyway. I would never murder anyone. The captain and me started becoming good friends. I guess because of my treats. Each night we'd go to the restaurant with some other officers. I'd take them to eat and have drinks together. In exchange for my generosity, I was given my own cell, though most of my time was spent in the captain's office. I contacted the son of my friend Vic for legal help. He sent his lawyer friend from Cebu to come see me. For our purposes, let me call him Larry. Larry the lawyer, okay? Larry said even though the arrest warrant was done in illegal ways, it was in fact a legal document. We had work to do.
Larry visited me in jail.
Mr. Bennett, I'm afraid you have only one option for gaining your freedom. Surrender your son.
You want me to hand my little boy over to her?
According to Philippine law, the child must stay with the mother until the age of 7.
That's not the law in Australia.
You're not in Australia.
But my son is a citizen, as am I, and she's a naturalized resident.
Yes. Well, as you learn here in the Philippines, we do things our way.
I listened to my lawyer and handed over my boy. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life, but whinging about it wouldn't get me anywhere. I had to take decisive action. By this time, all I could think about was getting my son back. I would do whatever was needed. One of my wife's workers gave me photos of Candy in bed with another man. Now, the Philippines is a very strictly Catholic country and adultery is against the law. The crime carries a 7-year jail sentence for guilty people. Funny thing is, the law is only for women. Unless a man sleeps with a married woman, he's free to commit adultery. It wasn't fair, but I knew I could use that system to my advantage. So my lawyer filed an adultery case against her. I paid to extradite a warrant and Candy was arrested by my friend who worked for the National Bureau of Investigations. It's like the Philippine FBI. We then put her in the NBI lockup for a few days. Now she was the one to feel the cold, humid floor and dirty smell of sweat. Incidentally, my NBI friend also advised me to have Candy killed and said he'd be happy to do it for me. I'll say it again, this was never going to happen. I'm not a murderer. Candy was facing a serious criminal charge. Sending her to jail for more than just a few days would be good enough for me. She started this game, but I was going to end it. When I was a boy, I learned the only way to deal with a serpent is to cut off its head. In response to my adultery case, Candy's lawyer filed 5 cases against me, all in the hopes of getting a 50% commission on whatever money they could extract from me. But they're all weak, petty cases. All it took was a little bribe to the fiscal, which is like the DA, and those cases were all thrown out. There was one unbearable thing. My son was in the care of his mother until the new custody hearing. That took time.
I'm worried about Alan with Candy. With her all-night Shabu binges and multiple lovers, how could she care for our boy? And me, who loves him and wants to spend every possible minute with him, still isn't allowed within 100 bloody metres. Not of him or his mum. I gladly spit that bit of Candy out of my life. But my son? I had to get him back.
I said to the boy, maybe you should see your father. He says, no, Mama, no. I ask him, what did he do to you? Alan just cries.
The hearing went on for 3 hours, a good portion of which was spent on Candy's lies.
But when my lawyer introduced the adultery charge against Candy, that was it. Throw in the drug addiction and the judge had no choice but give my son back to me. He ordered me to give Candy a payout of about $10,000. The irony is that's 10 times less than I was going to give her in the first place as a settlement. Remember when she called me to meet her at the mall? I was thinking of giving her $100,000, but then I fell into the trap and got thrown in jail. Mine as a lawyer's cut, Candied up with pocketing $5,000 from me instead of $100,000. I agreed to let her see Alan for 3 weeks every Christmas. Mind you, this was left entirely up to my discretion. As bad a person as I saw her to be, I did not want it to separate her entirely from her son, nor him from her. I sold my penthouse in Cebu and bought a place near Manila Bay. I enrolled my son into a wonderful private school in Makati. The school bus would pick him up each morning and he would wave bye-bye with a big smile on his face. All this time I was able to operate my business out of Singapore and travelled only a day a month. I'd left Alan well tended when I was away. Otherwise I spent all my time with him when he wasn't at school. We lived happily like this for 5 years. Then came Christmas, shortly before Alan's 11th birthday. As usual, I took him to Cebu to visit his mother for the holidays. This time, Candy stood on the dock with her friend Heather, the bank president. She was also a money launderer for the richest man in Cebu. He happened to be a drug lord. Incidentally, years later, after the Philippines changed presidents, he was shot to death by the police and Heather fled the country to Los Angeles. Anyway, seeing Candy stand there with Heather, awaiting my son, gave me a very bad feeling.
My fears became a reality when I went back 3 weeks later to pick up my son. He and his mother were nowhere to be found. I called and called. Finally, she texted.
I'm never returning him.
Why was she so confident? After all, legally I still had full custody. I was devastated to lose Alan again and hated being dragged back into the Philippine legal system. I hired a lawyer friend of my friend and got a court order to return my son. This required another hearing.
Inside the courtroom, my son refused to come anywhere near me. He screamed at the top of his voice. God knows what this woman did to my boy. Somehow she and her mother and her drug friend had brainwashed him against me. My heart broke.
The judge knew what Candy was up to and had no choice but to order her to return my son, and I had 100% custody. Of course, Candy did not respect the court order and ran away with Alan. I was desperate and only had one card left to play. After a week, I filed a contempt of court charge against Candy. I was desperate to get my son back. Already I could see the damage it was doing to my boy's mind. It might be irreparable. After several agonising months, I finally got a hearing.
Minutes before the hearing, Candy's drug launderer friend Heather walked inside the judge's chambers. What's she doing here? 10 minutes later, she walked out and announced something to everyone. I turned to my lawyer and said, I'm sorry, my Tagalog isn't quite what it should be. Did she just say, all is fixed? She looked so confident and all stoned on Cebu. Just then, the judge came out of his chambers and took his seat at the bench.
I have changed the child's custody to the mother.
That's not possible.
You'll get out of my court.
You can't do this. I have custody.
I said leave.
This was clearly illegal, but that didn't matter. I was a foreigner. I wasn't about to get equal treatment under the law, and I was powerless to stop it. I was sick to my stomach. Candy and Heather laughed as I dragged myself out of the courtroom.
A few weeks later, my lawyer contacted me. He said Candy would return my son if I paid a ransom. I paid $50,000 ransom but never saw Alan. To this day, I wonder if Candy or a lawyer got any of that money. It was just a scam cooked up by my own lawyer. I filed a case against the judge for ignorance of the law and appealed his decision to reverse the custody. 10 years later, I'm still waiting for a hearing. Losing my son broke me. He was my life, and for the longest time I thought I'd never see him again. I had no choice but to move on and try my best to put all this behind me. I was not able to see him again until he was 18 years of age and became a legal adult. By then he was 6'2" tall. Now, I'm 5'7". I've come to accept the fact it's highly unlikely he's my biological son. Doesn't matter to me one way or the other. He's my son and I love him. Now that he's a young adult, we've managed to rebuild our relationship, though it'll never be what it could have been if he'd lived with me throughout his childhood. Well, I finished my beer and it's time to move on. I'm sure you're wondering if I'd learned anything from this horrendous experience. Wisdom, after all, comes with age and pain. So this is what I tell people when they ask. Listen to old sayings like, where there's smoke, there's fire. If something seems too good to be true, it probably is. And last but not least, there's no fool like an old fool.
Allegedly is a production of Voyage Media. The series is produced by Nat Mundell, Robert Midas, Dan Benamore, and Adam Prince, in association with Darren Marlar's Weird Darkness. This episode, Love Gone Wrong in the Philippines, was written and directed by Adam Prince. Based on Geoff Beckett's book, Encounters, Stupidity, and Destiny, available on Amazon. A link is in the show notes. Edited, sound designed, and mixed by Jackson McLennan. Original music by Derlis Gonzalez. Starring Charlie Clausen as Jeff. Additional cast credits can be found in the show notes. If you're enjoying the show, please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you're listening, and subscribe now for future episodes.
On the next episode of Allegedly, we'll hear another story of love across the internet, where faces are cheap and interchangeable, but requests for money only get pricier. If you know you're being scammed, but you're still in love, what then? That's next time on Allegedly.